Stripe Show podcast on a Thursday. I'm your host, Travis Fulton. Thank you for making us part of your day. Those watching on YouTube, you see front and center, there's Xander Schauffele on there. Very different at the top of the swing from where he was a couple years ago. We will get to that here momentarily, but before we get to that, today's Stripe Show podcast brought to you by TrueSpec, my partners in club fitting. You can see their setup right behind me here. Clay Joyner, my fitter, he is fantastic. TrueSpec, I tell you, man, the experience is second to none. They've got every manufacturer, every head, every shaft. You need to go check them out, truespecgolf.com. We've got one right here in South Jacks, Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, here at the Travis Fulton Golf Studio. Welcome to some new listeners, some new people on YouTube watching. Action News Jacks, I am now part of their platform, so it's great to see some local people coming in and listening to the podcast or watching the podcast. It's an Instruction Thursday, and on a Thursday, we like to kind of take a deep dive. And there'll be a lot of guests coming up in August. September, we'll be bringing back a lot of the top coaches in the game, as well as some players on a Thursday, including a in-studio series. We'll be bringing 4 of the top teachers, players into the studio, live audience, Stripe Show podcast. That'll be from October to February. So we've got a great guest list coming up. Today, it's just me. And I want to share some thoughts on Xander Schauffele to start with, but also I've got some comments on Chris Como's show that ran yesterday with Bill Harmon. Now, Chris, friend of mine, I was texting with him today. He'll be coming back on the podcast. He is a friend of ours, and he's done a great job with Xander. But he had Bill Harmon on his Golf Channel show yesterday, and Billy said some really interesting things. So I'm going to get to that. In addition to that, at the end, I'm going to share with you something here in the studio on a draw bias approach wedge, 3/4 approach wedge, flighted, how that helps so many. And that particular shot, I think, is one that not only helps you with the approach wedge, but I think it checks so many boxes for so many on just how to hit a golf ball efficiently. All right, so we'll get to that. Let's start with Xander. Xander's made some nice changes with Chris. He's been vocal about it in the media. He's talked about it. And basically the difference when you look at Xander here, and for those that are not watching, I will really articulate this. The tendency was that the club would kind of hang too far to the left. Now, there's a difference between being laid off and being more laid off. And what I'm going to articulate here is that basically when you look at Xander, the difference, he is, let's just call it, less laid off. He's got the club pointing less to the left at the top and more down the line. You can clearly see that with a more recent video on the right. You can see the shaft's more parallel, or let's say it's more across the line. It's pointing more to the right than it did before, right? It was pointing more to the left. Now, this is a pattern and a change that you will see a lot of players work on when it applies. Most recently, I think these same changes have really worked with Sahith Theegala. Now, I've got Sahith up there, and you see the same thing. Look at Sahith. One on the left, club pointing to the left. One on the right, club shaft pointing more down the line, or it's more across the line, pointing more to the right than it was before. I think this particular change has really helped Sahith. I think it's helped him with his driver, perhaps more than anything. Jordan Spieth is another that works on this pattern. Now, it's not for everybody, but I do think it's for a lot. And I'm going to bring Xander back in here. Now, what does this have to offer? What is the downside of maybe getting the club too laid off or too short and pointing too left? So often, you will see players who kind of get that shaft that hangs too far to the left at the top. They will pull down on it. And when they pull down on it, that shaft will want to steepen a little bit. Now, not the end of the world. There's some players that, maybe pull down on it just a little bit, not many. But when you pull down on it, the shaft can get a little steep. It can, I think, encourage the body not to rotate as clean through impact. Oftentimes, as you start getting into the higher handicaps, you get very steep, you get very across impact, swinging out to in. You'll see a very high handle at impact where we get that loss of posture to try to accommodate that steepness. Now, in Xander's case, I think some of this is obviously going to be very minute, right? You're not going to see a steepening and a compensation from Xander Schauffele like you would a 10 to 20 handicap. But nonetheless, Xander, more laid off before, felt the need to get the club more down the line. And when you look at the club now more down the line, I think two things have happened. I think one is when Xander swings down, the shaft will pitch back normally. Now watch this, we're playing it more normal, and that club, I think, will pitch back more consistently with the club pointing more down the line. It's interesting, with higher handicaps, we know that one of the most common errors is players come down steep and they come down across their body. They swing out to in. They hit pulls. They hit slices. So often when you see that, you will see the backswing with the shaft, laid off. Not always, but you'll see the club pointing too far to the left. That's usually countered with a pivot that has some kind of body fault, has a sway or a reverse spine leaning left. And so they have to pull down. They have to steepen it, right? Like it's just almost inevitable that's what's going to happen. And they swing steep and they swing out to in. And then you shape that club differently. You get the club pointing more down the line. You get the club pointing more to the right. Now, all of a sudden, to do that, their body has to turn better. Their right hip wants to turn a little deeper. Their left shoulder wants to get a little bit more back behind the ball. And so just by getting the shaft pointing more down the line and more complete, call it, say, more parallel, the body is incentivized to turn better. And what's interesting is so often in just changing that, the club on the downswing pitches back and they swing more from the inside on their own. And so this is a pattern that Xander Schauffele has made to not only get the shaft, I think, to pitch more consistently back, which then incentivizes the body to rotate cleaner through impact. It's just a lot easier to open up when you know the shaft is pitching back each time. I also think he's gotten longer as a result of this because I think his turn is more complete. As I mentioned, when you get the shaft more complete at the top, you tend to load up and turn better. And so in many ways, you could argue, and I made a post about this on my social media, you could argue that this is where accuracy and power come together, right? By getting this shaped properly to the top. Accuracy, because again, shaft more down the line, not laid off. Shaft pitches back better, incentivizes you to rotate through impact cleaner, much more reliable, consistent path and face relationship at the bottom. More powerful because, well, you turn more, you complete your turn. So often you get short and laid off, the turn's not complete. And so club more down the line, you've completed more of a turn, more speed, more power. So I just love these changes. I love it. And I don't know what the exact feeling is for Xander. I know he does that thing kind of with his right pec and his right shoulder kind of turning up and back behind him. And so I don't know what it is, but I oftentimes will get in there and tell people, I'll start moving their hands and their elbow. And one of the feels, and again, everybody's a little different, right? But one of the feels is taking that palm of the right hand for a right-handed player, right? If you were to set up and you get your palm facing the target and then you make your backswing and you turn your right palm away from you, right? So check this out. I'm hitting towards my sim. I take it back and I turn my palm away from me, right? So I rotate that palm that way. Left wrist kind of flattens out, and then you can see how that shaft would get going a little bit more to the right. Now, when you do that, you still want to get the left arm working around you. Like everything's still working around you. Let the body turn, but you'll feel the difference in that and how that shaft will get structured more down the line. And again, I can't tell you how many times. I mean, it is on a weekly basis over and over again that I'm fixing laid off club shafts and the body turns better to the top. And as a function of this, they swing more from the inside on the downswing. I just did a piece on it with Golf Digest and talked about Bryson DeChambeau's move. This is exactly how Bryson does it. And Bryson, in fact, does get it a little across the line. And then from there, where does the shaft pitch? Behind him, and he hits a draw. And Xander, I think, likes to hit a little draw with his driver. So I just love it. I absolutely love these changes. You're seeing it with other players. Sahith, I think it's the same thing. I think Spieth used it to kind of get back on track. He had that wild rehearsal. But it's not for everybody. Can you get too across the line? Can it get too detrimental where you're getting your arm wrapped around you too much and the shaft too across the line? You can, right? And usually when that happens, so often the club gets kind of trapped behind you and you start hitting too many blocks and too many hooks. And usually when you see that player, you know what they are? Like a single-digit handicap. And so that's when you get in there and you might shape it a little bit differently. I had one of those guys, had a very strong grip, had the club really wrapped around too much across the line, path was too much in to out. Weakened his grip, got his hands a little higher, got the shaft to feel like it was a bit more laid off. Same thing from there. Path was much more neutralized, less hooks. So, again, these are some of the things. This is live ammo that's happening in this studio and that Chris has been through and so many other top teachers have been through, sharing these experiences to hopefully help you kind of say, where am I at? Like, am I hooking? Am I drawing? Like, what's happening? I think that's one place to look at. I want to transition now. We'll stay with Chris's theme. He's got a great show on Golf Channel. And he had Billy Harmon on yesterday. I used to work with Billy at Golf Channel on a show called On the Range. It was Wednesday night. And him and I were kind of, back, we would look at golf swings from the PGA Tour, LPGA Tour, and they'd have a camera there. And at the time, this was kind of new. It was like 2014 or 15, somewhere in there. And Billy, of course, the Harmon, it's a great family and instruction. Butch, probably the best teacher of all time. Billy's right there. He's a great teacher. And he was kind of the old school. And here I am, the young guy from Idaho, just whippersnapper and, trying to hold court. And, but Billy's great. We've had a lot of good times together on TV and just outside of that too, and talking and stay in touch from time to time. And he's been on the podcast. But Billy, he brought up something. He said, it's interesting. He says one of the styles that's not talked about a lot in the backswing is what's called up and in. All right. Up and in. Now, if you listen to this podcast, you've heard me say that 1,000 times, because if there's someone who discusses up and in, it's me. And the reason that is because that if you come in here and you're struggling from an inside takeaway, I'm probably going to fix it. Now, if you come in here with an inside takeaway and your name is Matthew Fitzpatrick, well, we'll probably have a different conversation. Maybe. But an inside takeaway is when that club head gets in behind the hands early, right? Imagine the shaft gets parallel to the ground halfway back and the club head's behind the hands. I mean, you just suck it inside. It's all over the place. All over the place. I mean, it's like job security. You could argue it's one of the assets of building this studio is fixing that move. And what fixes it is the sequence of up and in. And he used a couple examples. He used Jay Haas, who he taught for years. He used Freddie Couples, but he used one of my favorites, and it's right here, Kenny Perry, one of my favorite golfers of all time. Many reasons. First off, Kenny's just an absolute jewel of a person. Number two, you know what Kenny does first? Watch up. Watch the club head. Up. He's getting that club head to work up. And he's doing it as a function of folding his right elbow, no different than like picking up a ball. If you reach down and pick up a ball and folded your right elbow, the ball would work up. He also kind of starts hinging that left wrist vertically. But that club head is working up. It's not inside. It's not staying low and in. So he goes up first, and then from where? Then where does he go from there? In, right? Or like I would say, around. Up, in, or up, around. Okay? Around, in, however you want to look at it, is basically depth. He's now turning the right hip, left shoulder coming back behind it. And so his hands and his left arm can get deep behind him. But the sequence is key. If you take the club head back inside, and I'm telling you, there's millions of them out there. You go up first, then in. Just like Kenny Perry. Okay? Or you go up first, then around. Just like Kenny Perry. And so I'm with you, Billy Harmon. I'm with you. Up and in. Sign me up. And the reason why you sign me up, and I've been teaching this for years and years and years and years and years, because one of the most common errors in the backswing is an inside takeaway. The club head doesn't have enough up. The club head doesn't have enough out. It stays low and it gets sucked inside early. And then however you manage it from there pretty much determines what your handicap is going to be. But I see so many of people plateau because of that first move. So up and in, yes. Now, what's the opposite of that? The opposite of up and in is in and up, right? Now, sometimes you can have that conversation with someone. You can get them to think in and up. But the only time for me that I'm probably going to have that conversation is when the integrity of the club head to the hands is intact. Right? So the club head is, the club head is intact. It's far enough out in front of them and up in the first initial part of the backswing. Now, once you get that, once you get that kind of situated and you teach people how to do that, then it can kind of transfer into being more in and up because the integrity of the club head to the hands is intact. All right. So when I say up and in, up is more directed towards the club head, not the hands. It's more directed towards the club head. Work the club head up. And as the club head's working up, now turn so it can come in and around you. Now, when that's cleaned up, then maybe it starts to go more in and up. And when the conversation goes more in and up, the in is more directed towards the hands. Now, here's Patrick Rogers, beautiful swing, works with Jeff Smith. I think Jeff Smith is a great teacher who, I think really does a good job teaching kind of more of the in and not so much up, but still in and around and getting the shaft, to really be on plane. But the in is the hand, because look at the club head. The integrity of the club head to the hands is good. So when you have that, then you can focus on and transition more into turning and letting your hand path start coming in. This is kind of some of the progression that comes about in working through the language. I'm okay telling someone, hey, take it more inside everything with the turn, left arm on the chest, hand path in, if the integrity of the club head of the hands is intact, because that relationship will stay the same. So Patrick, as he turns, hand path in, and then it works around him, good lead arm depth, but that shaft is pitched back slightly and on plane, right? So if you look at the shaft right there, look, it's pointing slightly left at the top, no problem. That's an iron, probably a little more complete with his driver. But if you were to draw a line from that ball through the butt of the club, that whole shaft's on plane, and that's on plane. That's not laid off. Again, there's a difference between laid off and being more laid off. So with Patrick, it kind of goes in and then around, and he rotates that shaft to the plane, right? And it's perfect on plane. And then from there, it's just, he's just got it all in line where he can just turn and get the club to exit back around to the left. So hopefully that makes sense. The terminology of golf and who it applies to, right? Up and in. If you're someone who sucks the club head too far in behind you, too low and too in, you have got to get the club head. You don't have to, but you know what I mean. Club head up. Kenny Perry. Club head goes up. Jay Haas. Club head goes up. Then around. Or then in. However you want to look at it. Now, you start getting that relationship in line, and that club head has enough up. And it's out in front of you enough. And you're not someone who's sucking the club head inside. Well, then maybe it starts to go to more in and around, right? And now the in means the hand path going in and around. Rotate the shaft of the plane, no problem. You know, you see different things up here, right? There's different patterns, I get it. But we're just kind of speaking through the difference of what that language might mean, right? The difference between number one, up and in, versus number two, in up, or in around. Hopefully that makes sense. But I kind of perked up when I saw Billy talking about that, and I was like, all right, yeah, that's me. He's talking to me. All right, let's finish up with this. One of my students here, good player. And it's been this has been a fun project here. I've been kind of cleaning up a lot of little things. And one of the things that we've worked on that I think has really helped him understand, I think, some of the nuance of impact, of leaning the shaft a little bit more forward, of rotating back around to the left, but also letting the shaft release. All right. And when you look at the picture on the left, this is a guy who has got a much deeper right hip turn. He's got a little more left bend in his spine to keep him centered. Okay. He is someone who's learned how to turn more and lengthen things out a little bit, but he's had to counter that with the spine leaning a bit more to the left. Before, his restriction in turn, his upper body, it wasn't as dynamic. And I think he would just kind of let his head float to the right. Now, as I got him more dynamic in his turn, I can't have him, moving his upper body off the ball. I've got to keep his head more centered. And to do that, so often you've got to get them to feel a little bit of left bend towards the target, a little bit. Now, in doing that, his head stays more centered. So there he is, 3/4, right? Little 3/4 wedge, shaped nicely. Good wrist angles. Now, from there, his club shaft lays down beautifully on the right forearm. He's now rotating back around to the left. He's kind of encouraged to rotate. But what we've really been able to do now is hit this little draw biased wedge, 3/4. And we've really kind of, we've really kind of, I think, have trained it around what his right foot is doing. Before, his right foot would really pop up to the toe. I mean, like, jump up to the toe quickly, almost like he was launching. You can imagine his backswing was like turn the upper, lower, kind of quiet, right knee flexed, almost like he was like squatting down like a shot putter. And then he would push off that foot, right? Like the foot would pop up and he would really launch. His spine would go left. His spine would hang down in flexion, but he could get the face on the ball now. I mean, he could play, but he had his issues, his impact points and things like that. So one of the things that we've done as we've gotten things more structured is we've kind of said, look, let's roll the foot more on the instep. You can see the right foot kind of down on the instep. As he's kind of gotten more plugged in or banked on the right foot, his pelvis has pushed back more. His left hip wants to kind of work more back behind him. And the final piece, and what was really interesting today, is his spine. He really started to understand how his spine would extend. Now, extend is, if I was a standard, I would extend back, like my spine is extending, back where I get that dish. Flexion is forward. And so before he would launch, his spine would hang down in flexion. And as he would turn, he would kind of be out in front. So you can imagine, like, his head was really moving back and forth. And now, as he turns in his backswing, his spine would stay a little left. His weight would fall left. Now he's working on the instep of the right foot. And as he would turn back to the left, now it's like, now we got to work back up again. But the spine needs to extend. And to him, it felt like it extended a little to the right. And as that happened, then he could release it, and not drag it, and not let the elbow pull away and drag it. And so I really got him to feel how, when I say release, forearm rotation, like the left forearm would rotate to his left and the club would exit. You can see there on the right, kind of more 45 under his left shoulder. And I just love this picture on the right. Look at the right foot. it's coming up to the toe, but you can definitely see it's more down on the instep, right? It's definitely, rolling on the instep. And so I love that right foot. But then I also like the fact that his spine, you can see, is still curved to his right. So he's extending. But at this point, he has let the shaft release. Look at the shaft. It's like 45 degrees under his left shoulder. So I just love that little trio: right foot, spine, club shaft. And that looks very different from where he was. And so these little draw bias wedges where he would, kind of take it back 3/4, lean a little left, weight would fall left. He'd lean that shaft forward, but then he would rotate, extend, let the forearm release back around the other side. And he's hitting these little beautiful lower flighted wedges with a slight draw bias, like path a couple to the right. And so it's just, there's so many boxes being checked here that and I've seen this so many times, that when people get good at this and then they take it to the 7 and it's like, I'm gonna do the same thing. And they go to the 5, it's the same thing. And so I just love this image here. 3/4 draw bias wedge, right foot plugged in, kind of hanging out, rolling on the instep. Spine's extending. See the right shoulder a little under the left as a result of that. And then there's a little rotation there. He's not hanging on. He's just letting the shaft kind of rotate back around. And then sometimes we hit shots where he just kind of stopped there. Like he didn't even let the foot come all the way up. He just kind of kept the foot there. He really liked the idea of that left glute being active. He could feel that. And it just felt more efficient, right? It felt like he was doing less. He was more efficient with his pivot. He was doing less, but hitting it a little, I don't want to say further, but hitting it more flighted and controlled. Food for thought. All right. Good stuff today. Xander Schauffele. Something to think about there. Took you to a little backswing with Billy Harmon and working through some of the terminology there and who it might apply to, and then a little 3/4 flighted wedge. We're going to continue to do this. Like I said, we got a great guest list coming up starting in August. Top teachers, top coaches. They'll be joining me on Thursdays. Best bets on Tuesday with Keith Stewart. We've got you 2 days a week. For those of you that don't live in, Jacksonville or Georgia and you can't come see me, go to my website, travisfultongolf.com. I've got online lesson packages there, including my digital programs, which are very popular. You can buy one lesson, or you can buy a series of 5, or you can just buy the individual training programs, which is a kind of an inexpensive way to get into some of my teaching. My most popular training program is Operation Baby Draw, and you'll see some of the stuff that I just talked about in there. Operation Drip Fade is great for those that struggle with the hook and they want to be a little more fade biased. And then Total Driving, it's a close second. I mean, Operation Baby Draw, Total Driving are one and win. And a lot of people like Operation Drip Fade, and then a lot of people like Strokes Gain Short Game as well. So go check it out, travisfultongolf.com, travisfultongolf.com. And yeah, that's it. So hopefully I didn't confuse anybody. Thank you for being here. We'll be back next week with Keith on Tuesday.